Welcome. I'm Bob Sanborn, President and CEO of Children at Risk and one of the chairs of the Texas Family Leadership Council. We've gathered a group here today to talk about the child tax credit. We're very worried that it ended at the end of last year. We're worried that Washington is not adopting it again, or they're slow to adopt it. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about this. Our panel of experts is with us today. We're real excited. Dr. John Siburt is with us, the CEO of CitySquare in Dallas. John, thanks for being here. Mary Garr is here, the President and CEO of Family Service in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you, Mary, for being here. Also with us, Libby Campbell, President and CEO of the West Texas Food Bank out in Odessa. Thank you, Libby, for being here with us today. And Francisco Gallegos is with us. Francisco is with the United Way in Austin. So we're excited that Francisco's here. And we have two parents that we're excited to have as well. Christina Guajardo is with us from Austin, and Anya Mayberry, who's here with us from Tarrant County out near Fort Worth. So all over the state, we have people represented to talk about this child tax credit because it's so important for our future and for families here in the state of Texas. During the pandemic, President Trump and Congress enacted a series of payments, stimulus payments that went out. What we found is that those stimulus payments had an absolutely positive effect on families and an absolutely good impact on ending poverty or alleviating poverty, not only in our state, but in our country. When President Biden took over, he saw those good things, and we went to this child tax credit, which was enacted last year, again, giving payments to families, to low-income families, and allowing children to really thrive because there wasn't as much financial pressure on these families. This has been a policy that's been highly effective in terms of alleviating poverty, in terms of really helping families and really helping kids be successful. What we have found is that parents put their children first, and these payments have really helped them put children first in terms of things like making sure that there's more food and enough food on the table, helping with school expenses, medical and health needs, and just really paying a lot of those bills that were going unpaid before. So this is an extraordinary time that we're going through in our country, and these payments have really helped us. I think what's been sort of unusual for a lot of researchers is this idea that this has become sort of a once-in-a-lifetime way to really combat poverty. And if we're really serious about making sure that children grow up and thrive and be successful, and we know that poverty has an adverse effect on that success, this is a great public policy, maybe the best public policy in terms of alleviating that poverty. When you look at the history of the child tax credit, it goes back to that Republican Congress, that Contract with America, where Republicans said, hey, let's focus on our families, let's focus on our children. That's what we're doing now. And we want Washington today to see, yes, maybe we're not going to pass Build Back Better, but can we separate those things out that we know have a positive impact on our kids? And the child tax credit is one of those things that overwhelmingly has a positive impact on our children. I talked to a Washington insider recently, and I said, why doesn't everyone get that this is something that could pass? And his answer was, oh, it's something that probably could pass. The one adverse thing is that it seems to many to be very expensive. And I thought about that for a little bit, and I thought, you know, don't we want to invest in our children? Isn't this worth it when we think about all the kids that will really be successful because of this child tax credit? This is an investment worth making. And so we're calling on parents and influencers and people all across the state of Texas to say, listen, this little piece, this child tax credit needs to continue. It's important for our families. It's important for our children. It's important for the future of Texas. And so all of us here today are here to say we need to move forward with the continuation of the child tax credit. It's sort of imperative for the future of our state. So if we care about our kids, and I know we all do, this is what we need to do. Parents, put children first. Can't we as a state put children first as well? I think it's important that we do that. Let's go to a couple of our experts. John Siburt is the President and CEO of CitySquare, a great organization in Dallas, doing a lot to fight poverty. Dallas, from the Dallas perspective, John, what are you seeing with this child tax credit? How's it helped? Where do you see us going forward on it?
Sure. Thanks, Bob. It's great to be with you today. In Dallas, I would say we're seeing so many different kinds of economic pressures on low-income families because of the pandemic. Disruption to schools, disruption to childcare, that feeds into this great resignation we're seeing, that the cost to go to work, it costs more to go to work than to not with those kind of disruptions. Healthcare costs are rising. And then in Dallas, we're dealing with a housing crisis. The appreciation of housing in Dallas is unreal. We're quickly becoming California-like in our cost of housing, and that's a huge economic pressure on families. And so even before those pressures, what we would see continually in our food pantry are families coming to get food because there's too much month at the end of the money. And so now you add in the other pressures of how do I pay for childcare or deal with disruptions in childcare? How do I deal with some rising healthcare costs? How do I deal with rent going up? That's really putting pressure on these families to say, now there's really a lot more month at the end of the money. The one thing that was offsetting that and really addressing those pressures was the child tax credit. And so we were seeing folks like the families in our food pantry now be able to have enough money to get to the end of the month and have some money to offset some of these other pressures and disruptions. And so it was a very powerful tool. And, we talk at CitySquare a lot about, we would love to work ourselves out of business. We would love to get to where people don't need us. Well, if that's going to happen, it's through these kind of policy changes where we invest in families and they now have the means that they need to make it to the end of the month. So for us, what we see in our food pantry are the families that have too much month at the end of the money. And if they don't have a continuation of this child tax credit, then they're going to need to keep coming to our food pantry and to others for services. But if we invest in them and give them this resource and say, we're going to invest in your children, that's what they're going to do with it. They're going to invest it in childcare for their kids and in paying the rent and in making sure their kids have the education they need and making sure their kids have healthy food on the table. And so we think it's a great way to empower people to invest in them so that they don't need groups like CitySquare.
And that's the key, isn't it? This is one of these policies that really frees families up to be able to not depend on outside groups to help them. So thank you very much, John.
You bet.
Let's go out to San Antonio. Mary Garr is here. She's the President CEO of Family Services San Antonio. Mary, nice to see you. Tell us about sort of your take on all of this.
Thank you, Bob. And, Family Service, we serve in Bexar County, San Antonio. It's our largest area, but we actually provide programs and services across 14 counties out to the Winter Garden area, Crystal City, Uvalde, and surrounding counties there. So we have both a rural and an urban perspective. And, what we've seen with the child tax credit and the supports it's provided families has been very beneficial. But what it really does is really provided a big Band-Aid on a much deeper need, a huge problem across America and especially here in Texas as well. And the families that we have served for 119 years, these challenges existed before the pandemic. And these challenges are going to continue to exist going forward. The problem with the pandemic is it really just put so many more families over the cliff when they lost jobs and, had reduced hours, lost access to schooling supports, digital divide, and all those other aspects here. So put that on top of people who were already struggling, it just made it worse. And when we're talking about people who are stressed every single day, that becomes toxic in family units, and it makes it hard for them to figure out how to move forward, let alone think about meeting today's needs. The child tax credit has provided a lot of support for families to enable them to catch up on past bills, to be able to pay their rent, pay, for food and gas, utilities, childcare, basic needs out there, pay back short-term loans to family members, that they had to borrow from. The list goes on and on. So all of that was helping to provide some sort of relief or a little bit of breathing space for them to be able to, take a moment, catch up here when they could. And for some even start to put aside some emergency savings, which, as we well know, doesn't exist for so many families, and a $400 car bill can put them over the edge, as we know. So having that enabled so many families to just be able to think calmly for once in a while, as opposed to all the daily stress they were having. Losing that tax credit now means that they're going to be back in that same situation that they were before if they haven't been able to move forward. And as we know, a lot of the other economic supports and moratorium on evictions and other things, as they've started to go away, just creates even more stress down the road. And as we work to support families and especially children who feel that effect, it affects their health, it affects their future educational opportunities. That effect just goes on, and we're at risk of losing a whole generation of children because of not having the ability to work through this pandemic in a sustainable way. This child tax credit has helped them to do so. The other piece of that, obviously, as we come up on tax time, ensuring families know about accessing VITA for support for the earned income tax credit. Also ensuring that that if, understanding what the impact of taxes were for them with child tax credit. Some folks were afraid to even access it because they didn't know the impact. Other people rely on that income tax refund to get them through those next few months because that is their source of income. So we have a lot of things still to work through locally and within each of our organizations, but pushing that policy to bring back something like that child tax credit. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much, Mary. Mary, I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but I know that as a former garrison commander, as a veteran yourself, this is something that helps a lot of veteran families and current families, right, that are serving our country.
Absolutely. And I've actually given some academic presentations on that as well. People don't realize that many of our military families are eligible for things like, WIC and all that. They have the income levels where they're eligible for some of the same economic supports that a lot of our low-income civilian families have. And they have many stressors as well, not, the military piece, but the stressors they might have had when they went into the military. So, this can affect them in a positive way as well. Losing that also can affect some of them too, based on where their income was.
Yeah, thanks for that, because we need to remind, this is a wide swath of people that this can really help, this policy. So thank you very much. Let's go out to West Texas, out to Odessa. Libby Campbell is with us. She's the president and CEO of the West Texas Food Bank. Libby, a lot of questions surround around this are food, right? And when you look at the percentage of how people are using this money, food is at the top of this list. Talk a little bit about how this has had a big impact of sort of alleviating food insecurity.
I think when you think, we serve 19 counties out here in West Texas. It's equivalent to 34,000 square miles. So it's about the same size as the state of Maine. We're kind of unique. We do have the Midland Odessa area, which is I like to consider very small, Dallas, Fort Worth kind of metro in comparison. And then the rest of the area we cover goes all the way down to the border and all the way over, a little bit east to Big Spring. We go up to Lamesa or Dawson County, and we kind of go a little bit west, and El Paso has the last 3 counties in the state of Texas. So we have a very rural population that is truly who we cover. And if you really think about pre-pandemic, we served about 6.8 million pounds of food to those 19 counties. We just finished our fiscal year at the end of September of 2021. And we did 12.8 million pounds of food to those 19 counties. So we've seen a huge amount of growth since the pandemic, which is to be expected amongst food banks. But out here, we have a very high cost of living already, just because we are a boom bust kind of oil community in West Texas. So we always have housing shortages. Our schools are always very overfull. It's hard to find daycares for our parents so that they can work. So it is kind of a challenging area. But what really that tax credit did is it gave our parents the ability to be able to purchase food. And then if you add in some other problems that have come out of COVID, of the pandemic, which is inflation, we're at the highest inflation rate over since the last 30 years. It was at 7.1% is what they logged it in December. And you really think about what the cost of commodities or groceries are to our families already is high just in a metro area. But then you add in that cost of what our rural communities are truly truly dealing with. And also with the supply chain problems, they have very little access. So if you live in Sanderson, Texas, your closest grocery store is actually in Fort Stockton, which is 67 miles away. So you add in the cost of the fuel to get there if you have the ability, plus then you add in the cost of just what commodities are costing in general now in the grocery stores. That tax credit really did give them the ability to be able to cover their needs. If you look at the trends that we've seen in the pounds that we've distributed throughout the pandemic, we actually had a high point of 1.4 million pounds of food of December of 2020. That's what we were distributing in 1 month, which for a small rural food bank, that's a lot. But when we started to see when the tax credit payment started in July, our pounds actually started to go down of what we were distributing to those 19 counties. We got back down to only distributing about 780,000 pounds a month, which is still higher than pandemic levels. But we did start to see our line starting to get shorter. Now, since the tax credit has ended, already in our January numbers, we've already seen an increase. And what concerns me more is that the inflation is continuing to rise. Meat's up at least 36%, even the cost of eggs in your grocery store are up 11%. And if you have somebody who's making even $15, $18, or even $20 an hour, if they've seen an increase in their pay because employers are paying more, those increases are not keeping up with the cost of food for our families. So if you have an extra $150, $175 on your grocery bill for a family of 4 a month, and you're making, $18 an hour, to be quite honest, that's devastating to your budget, much less if you have a car problem for $400 or, daycare suddenly goes up, or somebody's sick, or maybe somebody can't go to work because their children are in quarantine because they've been exposed or have COVID. It truly is a devastating effect. So this tax credit has given the ability for our families to be able to purchase food. It looks like there is no end in sight currently on the cost of what our families' grocery bills will continue to increase. 27% of the clients we're seeing currently in our lines have never needed any form of public assistance. So if you think about that, that's WIC, that's SNAP or food stamps, that's unemployment. So they are having to come, and they have jobs. So they even can't qualify, to be honest, for some of those unemployment benefits and those things that have been offered because they still are working. And they are definitely looking at the cost of what it really means to what it costs to go to work. What is the fuel cost? What is daycare? What is, maybe extra clothes, and even purchasing extra food for them to be able to go to work. And that's part of that big resignation, while you're seeing families are having to make hard decisions right now that maybe if they went to work, they would actually be in the hole closer to $400 or $500 a month negative. And that tax credit really was helping them be able to eat the actual cost of going to work, plus be able to deal with the inflation that we're seeing in our grocery stores. And it is very concerning. Before the pandemic, Feeding America does a big survey. It's called Map the Meal Gap, and it actually measures things like child, food insecurity. And I was really proud when we got that report right before the pandemic in February of 2020. We had moved the needle in the right direction of actually reducing food insecurity for children in the 19 counties that we serve. We have since gotten a revised report of that, and it is just staggering that we've almost taken like 28 steps backwards to being able to truly deal with food insecurity for our children, especially in rural communities. The tax credit really was essential for our small rural communities to be able to survive throughout what we're seeing, which is kind of an onion peeling problem with COVID, with the inflation, supply chain. Are there enough containers, fuel costs? Are there enough truck drivers? All of those things have layered into just the basic, whether you're middle income or even low income right now, you truly are feeling a stress in your budget. And that tax credit really did provide a lot of relief.
It is amazing to understand that the $200 to $300 per child, that goes a long way for a lot of families, right? So yeah, thank you very much, Libby. Let's go out to Austin, after Odessa, the second coolest city in Texas, right? Austin, and Francisco Gallegos is with us. We're the United Way of Austin. He's in Family Pathways. Francisco, give us an idea from your perspective, how the family tax credit has been helpful.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, at United Way within my department, our goal is to outright remove barriers and or attempt to mitigate them for people to be able to access workforce development programs and ultimately be able to access middle skilled jobs, which allow them to thrive in our economy here in Austin. With that said, within our umbrella and programming, we've been doing outreach regarding community tax sites and their adjacent services, as well as an evaluation piece. What it is that we found throughout the course of that evaluation is that many of the families that live in minority majority neighborhoods primarily have an increased ACE score, that's adverse childhood experiences. These are events in childhood that have lasting impacts well into adulthood. They affect health, well-being, and future academic and financial potential of children. With that said, I have a couple of figures that I want to share,
Sure.
which we found throughout the course of that evaluation. They primarily focus on economic hardship. What we found is that in our 650 plus family sample, 52% of families could not afford proper medical care. 51 could not pay all of their monthly bills. 33 could not afford to go to the grocery store consecutive times in a single month. 14% of adults had to cut a meal or skipped a meal outright for financial reasons. We have adverse weather incoming in the next couple of hours. 22% of our families reported shutting down the heat or air conditioning because of financial constraints. 22 were not able to see a doctor or dentist, and 24 were very short of money at the end of each month. This is something that we compiled in the last 2 quarters of last year, when it is that the child tax credit payments were actually available. What it is that we see is the pullback of these benefits ultimately are going to have these hardship metrics that we compiled increase. And in terms of our work, what it is that we want to do is we want to, one, promote the tax credits because they have these longitudinal effects on families. And what we found is that non-filers generally have lower protective factors compared to people that file and are able to claim the earned income tax credit, the child tax credits. We found some disparities that we thought were shocking. One of them is among Latinos, that specific community, fewer than 10% used a community tax service to file. Most actually opted for a paid professional. For a multitude of reasons, there's misnomers that they'll receive the money sooner, that they'll receive more money, or outright because tax centers are funded by the federal government. There is concerns if they are undocumented, that is, that their information is going to be shared with immigration or another federal agency. But overall, what we found is that most people just do not know about these free in-person filing services. Some people are uncomfortable and or there's barriers such as transportation and broadband access that impede them from being able to utilize these services in person and or an e-file option. With that said, what it is that we're doing is we're trying to promote our services so as to try to mitigate these disparities in filing and to inform people that while advanced child tax credit payments have ended, they did so last December. Ultimately, what they received over the course of July to December was only half of the child tax credit. The other half, what is the remaining balance, is available this year after they filed their tax return. So that's very important. We want these families to be able to claim what is left. For those families that were not able to claim those monthly payments, we want them to be able to claim the bulk of the credit this year. And so for that reason, we're happy to provide insight into our findings and also share our resources with you all as
And I
well
think
as-
that point, Francisco, that parents can still get some of that money from last year, right? That's an important piece of information that I think we want people to know. But before we, thank you, Francisco, very much. Before we go to parents, John Siburt, I wanted to ask you one other question, and then I want to talk to the parents for a minute. But we know that across the state of Texas, there's about 500,000 children that live in families with an income of less than $10,000 a year, right? These are extreme poverty. And just in, they're all over our state, but in pure numbers, it's Dallas and Houston, right? In terms of pure numbers that have a lot of these kids. From your perspective, John, it seems to me that this was an overwhelmingly great tool, especially for this 500,000 children, these 500,000 children.
Yes, in our work in the fight against poverty, I often tell people, look, if you want to make this work simple, the way to get people out of poverty is for them to have more income. And so when people have more money coming in, they are less poor. And anything we can do to make that happen is a good thing. And so I think the economics of this, in terms of this is a benefit that really will directly help families with children, that math just works out.
Yeah.
So, anything that we see that actually allows people to have more money at the end of the month, what we've learned is people know what to do with that people can be trusted to invest in themselves and invest in their families. And so if we believe in our fellow Texans, believe in our neighbors, trust them, and invest in them, that generally always works out well for us. And so, that's simple, but yet we don't seem as a country to fully understand that yet.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you, John. So speaking of trusting, two parents that we trust a lot, we'll start with Christina Guajardo in Austin. Christina, from your perspective, raising a son, how has this impacted you? And I know you've been very engaged at the United Way as a part of this. So talk a little bit about that if you can.
Yes, of course. Thank you for this opportunity. So I began my involvement with United Way back in 2018 as they launched their 2-Gen strategic plan. And I was beginning my journey as a single mom, wanting to continue my education with the Jeremiah program here in Austin. And so I'm very blessed that I have these two organizations that have helped me along the way. And it is because of them that I know of these supports that are available to us. But I know that there's a lot of families that don't have this information or have fear regarding what these tax credit involve. But one of the things that now I've graduated, I have my degree from the University of, I have a Bachelor of Applied Arts and Sciences now, and I want to advocate for these parents. I want to advocate for the moms that I live with at the Jeremiah program. I live with 35 other single moms that are trying to continue their education. So I'm not just talking about myself. I'm talking about the stories of the moms that I live with, the things that I see firsthand here, and how this child tax credit has helped all of us. To start out, I want to tell you a little bit just about myself and my son. I'm a single mom of a 4-year-old boy, and I benefited greatly from the credit. It helped me stay afloat during the times that I was not able to work because my daycare had shut down. And unfortunately, the tax credit has ended, and that's why we're here today, but the pandemic has not. And just last month, my daycare closed for 2 weeks, and that was very difficult because I don't have family here, so I rely on that daycare to be able to work. As a part-time employee, I don't have vacation or sick time to cover these unexpected situations. And of course, I want my son to be safe, but as a single parent, I'm the head of my household, and I'm also responsible for providing for my family. And this problem, like I said, is not unique to me. I see it here with the moms that are going to school and find themselves in difficult situations, not being able to complete their education, not being able to go to work every time the daycare closes. And so this tax credit has really helped with that for my family and a lot of the families that I live with here. Every time the child care center closes, then we have to find alternative daycare, and that's expensive. And there's only so many times that you can ask a friend without giving them any money to help them get through this time as well. And so that's what the tax credit did for me. It helped me stay afloat. It helped me pay other people to watch my son while I had to go to work. And another thing that I also want to talk a little bit about is just the stress that this brings on our children, because they're used to the routine that they have at school or at daycare, and then all of a sudden it closes, and here we are at home. And as parents, it's very stressful, and we're trying to stay afloat, but we're worried about how we're going to pay the rent. We're worried about how we're going to put food on the table. And that stress is passed on to our kids, and we see it. We all see it. We see it in their behavior, with just the amount of patience that we have with our needs. And it's just very difficult. And I think a lot of parents are getting burnt out with all this stress. And I think it's disproportionately affecting children in low-income households.
Yeah, and those of us that have grown up in poverty understand the stress of not having money, right? It's such a big deal, right? And yeah, thank you. Christina, thank you very much for the work that you're doing with United Way, and thank you for being here. Let's go Fort Worth, Tarrant County. Anna Mayberry is with us. And Anna, we wanted to ask you specifically, I know that this has been, the child tax credit has helped you a lot, but you have special needs kids, at least one. Talk about that in terms of the child tax credit and your special need child.
So, hi, thanks for having me first off. So yes, I do. One of my children is autistic. And then I have a son who has had brain surgery, who is getting ready to prepare for a third one at this point. So having the child tax credit for me and my household, that meant that I was finally able to cover the cost of my daughter getting ABA therapy, which is not covered under insurance. And even trying to apply for state Medicaid did not cover these services that she needed to continue to advance, to continue with her speech therapy. And I don't know if some of you guys know it, but just 30 minutes a week costs almost $800. I could not afford that. There's no way I can afford that and still maintain taking care of my other children, or even taking care of myself and my own medication. My household, a little bit about us, we are a family of multiple children. So our children that are just 18 and under go 18, 17, 14, 11, 12, 9, 6, 5, and just turned 3. And so having this many kids in a household and trying to maintain, and we come from a 2-parent household. Both me and my husband maintain jobs. I actually maintain more than one job. And when the pandemic happened, it stopped everything. I worked in the beauty industry. I couldn't go to work. Every salon got shut down very quickly. And then I had to think about the things of, do I want to take this risk of continuing to do these services knowing that I may lose my license? Or do I want to take the risk of potentially getting my children sick? And then halfway through the pandemic, what happened? I got sick. I was diagnosed with kidney disease. Told that I needed a transplant. So now what do I do? Because now I can't work at all. And then that little bit of relief came when I found out that the child tax credit was coming available and that my family would qualify for it. That slight, just little bit of $300 per kid made such a huge difference, because that means that, okay, we didn't have to stress or worry about whether or not we were going to be able to maintain our rent, which had almost doubled at that point, or maintain, my daughter's ABA therapy. We were able to start it for her finally and get her a caretaker that I was much needing, because due to the pandemic, she was having bits of recession where she was backtracking, and we needed to get her back on track. And I needed that assistance. For me and for moms that look like me and the moms that are in my community, so many of these moms lost their spouses during this pandemic due to COVID-19. And so they went from a 2-parent household to a 1-parent household. Some of these moms were even single moms. So for that child tax credit, being a mom who hasn't worked in 3-4 years, or a mom who was solely dependent on their spouse who has now passed, that was a relief. You were able to provide just for those few months a little bit more roof over your children's head, food on the table, medication for yourself, medication for your children, medical treatments for your children. It may not seem like much because the dollar amount seems so small, but even the smallest dollar amount makes such a huge difference when you're talking about moms that are living paycheck to paycheck, or you're talking about families that have so many fires to put out at once. If I can just put out one fire, then I can make it to tomorrow. And that's what so many of us moms live by. And so if you do believe in the child tax credit, please advocate for it. Reach out to your legislative officials, reach out to your mayor, write the president, write whoever you feel that you want to be heard. Raise your voices and speak up, because it's only going to be parents like myself and Christina and everyone else that is a part of this right now. It's only going to take our voices and so many more to get it done.
Wow,
Thanks, Bob.
thank you so very much. I mean, you know, raising kids and being an advocate, you know, so thank you very much for what you're doing. And I think Christina and Anna really speak out for parents. And it is important that parents speak out as well and be a part of this advocacy effort to say, we need this for our kids. It's so important. People often don't know 60% of the children in our schools are classified as coming from low-income families. It's a large number in our state. So before we wrap up, alguna palabra para la prensa latina. Tenemos algunos amigos aquí que hablan español. Podemos empezar con Francisco. Una palabra o dos, Francisco. ¿De qué estamos hablando? Y es el child tax. Una palabra o dos, Francisco.
Sí, buenos días para la prensa latina. Estamos aquí hablando sobre el crédito tributario por hijos, sobre lo que es efectivamente la cancelación de esta política y por qué es importante que regrese o sea instituida de nuevo. El año pasado salieron pagos de $250 a $300 que las familias en gran parte pudieron recibir. Esto incluye familias de domicilios donde padres son indocumentados. Estos créditos no son préstamos, los reciben los padres solo por cuidar a sus hijos, y estamos hablando sobre el impacto que han tenido no solo para los padres de las familias, pero también para los hijos, y cómo es que la reclamación de estos beneficios al final de cuentas tiene un impacto en las vidas de los hijos y cómo es que les beneficia. Así que estamos aquí para decir que estamos apoyando lo que es la expansión de nuevo de este crédito, y muchas gracias a ustedes por darle esta atención al público.
Sí, gracias, Francisco. Mary Garr, en San Antonio, usted habla español también. Una palabra para la prensa que puede hablar.
No, todavía. Necesito practicar más para,
Okay.
para hablar de este.
I did not mean to
muy
put you on the spot,
importante.
Mary. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I did not mean to put
appreciate
you on the spot.
No, en el
So,
futuro yo puedo ayudarlo.
okay, very good. Y últimamente, Cristina Guajaldo, como una madre, dígame del Child Tax Credit, en pocas palabras, ¿qué es el beneficio del Child Tax Credit?
Claro, buenos días y gracias por este tiempo y por dejarnos hablar de los beneficios, de cómo esto nos ha ayudado. Como madre de un niño de 4 años, esto me ha beneficiado inmensamente. Me ha ayudado para poder pagar a personas alternativas a la guardería cuando cierra, para que cuiden a mi hijo. Este crédito me ayuda y espero que continúe, más que nada porque todavía no se acaba la pandemia. Los efectos de la pandemia para los padres de familia todavía están muy presentes. Entonces, el crédito se suponía que era para ayudarnos mientras pasábamos por esta crisis, pero la crisis para padres de familia no ha terminado, y espero que podamos seguir hablando con nuestros representantes para que sepan lo importante que esto es y la ayuda que que esto da para nuestras familias y lo mucho que beneficia a los niños al no tener ese estrés y estar constantemente preocupados de cómo vamos a pagar la renta, cómo vamos a comprar comida. Todo ese estrés se lo estamos pasando a nuestros hijos y eso para mí es muy importante. Espero que este crédito continúe y agradezco que tengamos esta oportunidad, esta plataforma para hablar de la necesidad y el impacto que esto tiene en nuestras familias. Gracias.
Gracias, Christina. And thank everyone. John Siburt from CitySquare in Dallas, Mary Garr, Family Service in San Antonio, Libby Campbell from the whole of West Texas and Odessa, Francisco Gallegos, Central Texas, Austin, Anna Mayberry up in Fort Worth and Tarrant County, Christina Guajardo also in Austin. Thank you guys very, very much. This is an important thing for the whole state of Texas, for the future of our state. This is important that every Texan understand that standing up for little Texans so they can be strong adults and productive citizens is going to be very important. So thank you all very, very much. And we'll keep up the work.